All right. Any questions on the homework problem sets? Any questions on the homework problems? So change it. The due dates, both of the due dates are Sunday night at 11:30 on 14th of November. That's the last time you can submit answers to get credit for that homework. And that's because I want to have the homework keys posted. They'll be posted outside my office. Now you'll be able to see the answers in Blackboard, but the keys outside my office will actually show the work, show how I arrived at the answers. So 14th due date in Blackboard calendar, you should see that due date. That's the last day to get credit for that homework. The last day to do your quizzes. So for the quizzes, we have due dates for the quizzes, and I go in and pull out the information, pull out who actually did it by the due date, because remember you have late penalties. If you take it after the due date, you still can't take it off after the due date. You'll get a late penalty. So the last time to take any quizzes that you missed for a late penalty will be the 15th of November. That's at 11:30, and then at that time, after that last time, all the quiz keys become available. We'll be able to access them, and that's because our next exam is in 2 weeks. Our next exam is in 2 weeks on the 19th, here at 8 a.m. We have Tri-Beta. You'll start seeing posters up. We've got the Tri-Betas do a blood drive, and I honestly can't remember what day it is. What day? What's that? The 30th? Oh yeah, today's the 5th. Yeah, today's the 5th. The 30th, November 30th, Tuesday after Thanksgiving break. Tri-Betas have a blood drive. I have always traditionally supported blood drives. I know we have extra credit based on attendance. It's how we're doing the attendance. You could obviously stay home and watch videos at your own time. But if you want to donate blood for additional credit, extra credit, then we could do that. I always would do 5 points, and the 5 points was always added to exam 3. That's probably what we'll do. Since exam 2 and exam 3 count for the same percentage, they're both 25%, it doesn't really matter which one they get added. Now you might be thinking, hey, you know what? And I'll make it up. I'll make something up. Hey, I was lucky enough to have malaria and know what it feels like. You can't donate. You're excluded. So if you go and donate and try to donate and they tell you, sorry, you can't donate, that's okay. Just get a sheet that said you try to donate. You'll get credit for that. If you know you can't donate already and don't want to go through that trouble, then recruit someone. Find somebody to donate in your place, and then you'll get credit for that. I think, is there volunteer activities too that day? The Tri-Betas are asking people to help out. You can work the table. So if you want to volunteer with the Tri-Betas and work the table, that could be in place of donating. All right? So you'll get a form. If you can't donate on that day, you can go down to local blood donor center and donate. They'll give you a little sheet at the end of the donation saying that you've, the do's and don'ts basically of donating. Just bring that in. We'll get your credit. It'll have your name on it. Same thing. If you recruit someone to go donate for you, go do it. They have been, in years past, Tuesdays were always their movie ticket night days. You donate, you get 2 free movie passes. I don't think they're doing that right now. So, if you're going to be around normally, around Thanksgiving, HEB will donate turkeys. So if you go donate blood or platelets, then you'll get a coupon, a voucher for a turkey up to 13 pounds. So, awesome. Help out. There's a lot of people, a lot of people that need blood, especially platelets as well. So if you could do that, that'd be great. I'll just remind you about that. All right, this is where we left off. We're talking about the factors that regulate the populations. We introduced this idea of stability and how equilibrium is a special case where we are fluctuating right around the carrying capacity. Now, what keeps us at stable levels or at equilibrium? What keeps us there? Well, it's going to be a combination of our density-dependent factors and our density-independent factors. And one thing that I should mention is when we have density-independent factors, if that is a primary factor at regulating our populations or at maintaining some sort of population stability, then usually these mechanisms keep our population size way below our carrying capacity. Like way below our carrying capacity. Right? We said density-independent factors add noise, but if we were going to say that this is due to all of our density-independent factors, and they are the primary means in which we're regulating our population, then here's our stable equilibrium, or our stable population size. Our carrying capacity is going to be off the chart. That's how much of a difference it's going to be. So we do see that. There are populations that are regulated through these density-independent factors, and it's called non-equilibrium, but is what a lot of these things would, or a lot of the populations would be said. These are non-equilibrium because we're way far from carrying capacities. Just happens that our density-independent factors occur at such a frequency that it makes it seem like our population is going to be stable. So density-dependent controls, again, they don't always result in stability. We get this fluctuation that can happen with predator-prey interactions, and but this is somewhat kind of an exception. All right, usually when we see something like this is more about weather events, density-independent factors, where we're getting up closer to a carrying capacity, and then randomness happens. Cold front moves through, kills off a large chunk of the population, and then it comes back, and then, man, we have another disturbance or another weather event that happens. So just know that we don't always see stability. We don't always see stability. Now, what are some of these regulatory factors? We mentioned predator-prey. We mentioned competition. We're going to come back to, I think we're going to come back to competition later on in the course. But right now, we're going to focus on internal factors. So these are internal regulatory processes, which means that these processes happen internal to the population itself. So the population will be self-regulated. They're not going to be dependent on other outside factors. They're not dependent on other species. So self-regulation is defined as the internal density-dependent processes that operate independently of outside biotic and abiotic factors. The internal density-dependent processes that operate independently of outside biotic and abiotic factors. Since this is density-dependent processes, our intrinsic rate of growth must change as our populations change. And that goes back to our birth and death rate graph. So as our populations change, our birth and or death rate will be changing. There's two that we're going to talk about, two of these self-regulatory mechanisms. The first one is territoriality. You might not have thought about territoriality as being a regulatory process, but it is. Because your success at reproducing depends on your ability to find a mate. Right? It depends on your ability to find a mate, and to find a mate. Yeah, and if the success of finding a mate depends on your ability to claim and hold a territory, then you can have your mating successes completely dependent on your ability to hold a territory. So if you can get a territory, your chance of mating is going to be high. If you can't hold a territory, your chance of mating will be basically zero. That's going to be enough to regulate populations. So how does that work? As our population size increases, we're increasing the number of individuals that are out there seeking territory. But we're in a geographical area where there is a limited number of territories that can be claimed. So, as our density increases, we're going to get to the point where all the territories become filled. They're already claimed. And all those other ones that are looking for a territory, they can't get one. They can't find a territory. So those individuals can't reproduce. And if they can't reproduce, they're not replacing themselves in the population. So what we see then is our birth rate actually starts to go down. It's not because they're reducing the number of offspring when they do reproduce. It's we've got a lot of individuals in our population, but a smaller percentage of them is able to mate and reproduce. As our population then starts to decline, we'll get to a point where all the individuals that want to hold a territory can, because the number of territories exceeds the individuals in our population. When that's the case, now everyone gets to reproduce. Everyone gets to leave offspring and not only replace themselves, but increase our total population size. So that's this first part here. If you increase your population density, you're going to reduce the per capita birth rate because there's not enough territories for every individual to be able to mate. But there's a second effect as well. Because if you can't find a territory and if you can't mate, then there's this evolutionary process at work that's saying, hey, you really need to mate. And you need to do something to try to mate. And that evolutionary process is migration. So not only do we see a decrease in birth rates, per capita birth rates, as we increase density, but we also tend to see an increase in emigration, an increased departure of individuals, because these are the individuals, they can't get a territory, so they move out. And they try to find a new location that has territory that allows them to capture it and mate. So both of these processes, if we go back to our population equations, both of these processes affect our population size. Births add individuals to our population. If the birth rate goes down, we're reducing the number of new individuals. Emigration with an E, removes individuals from our population. So if our densities go up and we start having more immigrants in our population, we're going to cause a decrease in our population size. How often do we see this? We see it in the territory holders. So individuals that need to hold territory to mate, they can be regulated through this self-regulatory process. Territoriality. Questions? Stress is another self-regulatory process. Social stress hypothesis predicts that the pathological effects of crowding will cause a decrease in reproduction. Now, it's a hypothesis because it doesn't always apply, but I think it applies in enough populations that have been examined to where we can say, yeah, this is definitely a valid self-regulatory mechanism. So the social stress hypothesis would say that as our population size increases, individuals start to become stressed. Net result of it is less reproduction, and that causes our population to decline. And it declines to the point where stress is no longer an issue, reproduction resumes, and then our populations increase again. So you can kind of get a cycle. How does it work? Actually, it works through an interesting pathway. All right. So, and this is what the pathway kind of diagrams. It's not as nice as the handout diagram, because the handout I can actually have it stretch across the whole slide, the whole page. But I think this gets across the idea. So as we increase our density, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to increase the aggression. Why are we increasing the aggression? More competition, not only for territories, if there is territories. So yeah, you're getting to a point where this can also factor in with territoriality. But it's increased competition for all of the resources. All right, there's more competition, for those resources, and those that are best able to acquire those resources are going to be able to reproduce. So there's that evolutionary desire to do the best you can. And if that means becoming mean and becoming aggressive to get those resources, that's what it means. Because if you don't reproduce, your genes are dead. They're not getting passed on. So you've got this increased aggression due to the need to compete, to get those resources. That's also coupled with increased stress. All right, so because there are going to be fewer resources available, you're encountering other aggressive individuals, you're just going to start having stress responses. These two factors, increased aggression, increased stress, lead to an increased enlargement, or an enlargement, not increased enlargement, an enlargement of the adrenal gland. Right? What does the adrenal gland do? Fight or flight. Right? Great example. That's your fight or flight response, right? Adrenal gland enlarges because it's producing more of these fight type of hormones, which incidentally inhibit the production of reproductive hormones. So while you're increasing the adrenal gland to make you more competitive, to get to those resources, those hormones in turn are inhibiting your reproductive hormones. So you have less of a desire to reproduce. In some cases, with organisms, they don't even mature, get to that point where you are receptive, or the organism is receptive to mating. So, you increase the density, causes an increase in aggression and stress, increases the adrenal gland, leading to reduction of reproductive hormones, and thus lower reproduction overall. Less reproduction overall. Less reproduction causes a decrease in your population size, which thus relieves the aggression, relieves the stress. Adrenal glands drop back down in size, fewer of these fight hormones. Reproductive hormones can now act. Reproduction resumes, allowing our population to increase in size. Have we seen this? Yep, we have. Voles, rodents, are probably some of the best studied examples because they're small. They've got small reproductive lower generation time, so you can actually study populations over a reasonable amount of time. You don't have to wait 10 years for the next generation to come into the population. So that's where they kind of develop this hypothesis. Questions? Now, these regulatory factors, and we started getting to it. Social stress could also apply when you have territorial organisms. Territories are a resource. And if you increase the aggression, you're going to increase stress, and that could depress reproductive potential. And that's all saying that you don't have just one regulatory factor at work in our population. You actually have multiple factors. Multiple factors that can regulate our population. You usually don't see these until you start studying a population over a long period of time. Because when you study a population at like one specific time point, you're normally only going to see one factor that dominates. Maybe it's territoriality. That's that one factor that dominates population regulation. And then you would say, yeah, it's territoriality. That's what regulates population. And then 10 years down the line, someone looks at it and says, oh, that person was all wrong. It's not territoriality. It's parasitic diseases. That regulates it. Well, both individuals are correct. Both of those are regulatory factors. They occurred at different times. And you wouldn't have been able to see that unless you followed this population through time. So one factor may dominate at any one time, but we normally don't have a single factor that governs the population through all time. It's going to be changing. So this is a good example. I should say this illustrates quite well the role of contingency. That we start to make one conclusion and then it changes because the underlying variables change. Something we have to deal with. So this is a graph of Isle Royale. All right, Isle Royale is an island in Lake Superior. Let's see if we can find a map of this. You can see it. Lake Superior. That. This up here. All right, Google Maps. Here is Lake Superior. Large lake, largest lake of the Great Lakes. Isle Royale National Park. This island, fairly big island. It's isolated, right? In the middle of a freshwater lake. People have been going to the island. I mean, it's got trees. You can see it. It's preserved. Dude, satellite. See what the satellite gives us. See, you've got vegetation, everything. This island was colonized by moose. Colonized it in the early 1900s. I think they estimate 1912 is when they colonized it. They knew it had a fire ahead of time that kind of wiped out vegetation, and then moose colonized it. So the question, how did moose get there? Unlucky soul swam. Can moose swim? Yeah, they can. They can. I've seen them. I've seen a moose swimming across the lake. Yeah, hold on. Or walk there when? If it was frozen, yes. So, yeah, that is actually what is presumed to occur. Cold winter, cold long winter froze the lake enough to have ice that at least allowed them to walk most of the way there. They may have swam the last distance, but I think the idea is that they walked across the ice to get there. They colonized it. And people were on that island studying it. It's an isolated island. All right, so they colonized, and then they started looking at the moose population, and it took off. Moose populations took off, and then you had another fire. What's the fire? Could be a lightning fire, could be a cook that forgot to put the fire out. Smokey Bear would be unhappy, although I think this is Canada, so maybe Smokey Bear doesn't go up there. But you had a fire that decimated the population. So what type of regulatory factor is a fire? Density dependent or density independent? Density independent. All right. So fire took out a lot of vegetation, took out the food source. So is the food source bottom up or top down effect? Bottom up. The moose are browsers. They're going to graze as well. All right, fire takes it out. You kept the population low, and then another cold winter, prolonged cold winter, caused ice to form and allowed wolves to colonize. What's a prey item of wolves? Other prey items, including moose. So that was around 1945, 1960, 1946 when they colonized. All right, they reached a level where they were measuring them in the late 1950s, and they saw a relative stability between the moose and the wolf populations. And then you had factors that influenced both the wolf populations and the moose populations over time. So you had periods of heavy snow, that had a negative effect on the wolves, hindered their ability to hunt and capture their prey. So populations dropped down, wolf populations took up, and then as soon as you relieve that, now you've got an abundant food supply for the wolves. The wolf populations took off and depressed our moose population. So you've got this density independent factor that's regulating your wolf populations. The wolf population, the top-down control was released or limited and allowed the moose populations to take off. And then once you have that top-down control come back, populations, the moose populations decline. And then you see a moose population increase, and it just so happened that you had a canine parvovirus outbreak that, again, hurt the wolf populations. It released the moose from that top-down control and allowed them to take off. You did have a winter tick outbreak that hurt the moose population a little bit, but then moose populations weren't put under control again until you had deep snow. And the deep snow covered up some of the young vegetation that the moose would have been feeding on over that winter. So they were, again, suffered food supply, or limitation of food supply. So, the point of this is a great long-term study. We don't have many of these long-term studies in ecology because it's hard to study the same site over 20 years, 30 years. And due to the pressures of academics, it's kind of frowned upon. But we encourage it. This is the type of information that's important because if we didn't do this, we wouldn't have known all of these different factors are regulating our populations. If we just did one population, one time point, we would have concluded, oh, this is all top-down control. That's what regulated the moose population, but it's not. There's other things that can affect the moose population. There's other things that can affect the wolf populations. Which one is going to occur at any one time? Hey, that's contingency. We don't know. And it's hard to tell and predict which one's going to be the primary factor. All right, so know that, one factor is going to dominate at a single time, but that factor can easily change. All right, let's take a quick break for our quiz, 8:32, before we get to metapopulations. So the quiz, one answer today. Answer is 60, 60. 60. As you are taking this sentence quiz, remember the allelopathy lab, we set it up next week. So make sure you make your leachates. Should be made a couple days in advance so we can try to get any compound that's in that vegetation into the water. Right? And you'll need your proposal that says what you're doing and why you're doing it, why you're testing those plans. So attendance quiz, the answer was 60. What's that? That was the only answer. Yeah, just one answer, 60. All right. All right. Populations. We've talked about populations as being basically homogeneous. We did break it down. You've got a population where individuals can interact. I mean, all individuals have to be able to interact. And then we kind of subdivide it into the deems, which would be those individuals that are actually taking part in random mating. But the chance that we actually find a population that's like big like that, it's actually going down. Because as humans have expanded their range, our range, we started to fragment habitats. We started to take these big continuous habitats and break it up into small patches. And what we see is that our species of interest still lives in these patches. So our populations are going to exist more like a spatial mosaic, where you've got populations in each of these different patches that are going to be separated by some distance. Now, this isn't just humans. Humans aren't the only ones that cause this. All right, natural factors can cause this. If you have a fire, you have a grassland fire, runs through a tall grass prairie, it's going to make an area of inhospitable habitat. And it's going to create patches on the landscape, because you would think that the fire would go take out the entire prairie, but it doesn't always have to do that. You've got random factors that might limit the spread of the fire and leave isolated patches. So you can get natural spatial mosaics of our populations. When we have these spatial mosaics, each of our populations in the patch is going to be defined by its own regulatory factors. So each patch is going to have its own set of regulatory factors that are at work regulating the population. They're going to have its own set of selective forces, pushing populations towards, or the species towards, certain types of phenotypes. All right? But these patches are all going to be connected by dispersal, because your individuals can move. They can leave a population. They can enter a new population, bringing their genes and so forth. When we have a population that exists like this, we call it a metapopulation. So metapopulation is basically a population of populations. It's defined as a group of populations that are connected by varying degrees of dispersal. So this diagram represents a metapopulation. So we have our habitat, our landscape, our landscape is this gray box. Everything in gray is inhospitable habitat. You can't have a population living in that area and survive. Individuals can move through, but they can't stay, survive, and reproduce. And then you have various patches that are scattered throughout our landscape. Some of the patches are good. They're optimal habitats. Some of them are bad, where the bad habitats can sustain a population, but they're not going to really be good to allow the population to thrive. So if we compare optimal versus suboptimal habitats, the optimal habitats are going to usually reach a high population size, perhaps to their carrying capacity. Suboptimal habitats, on the other hand, are going to have a low population size. They might have a lower carrying capacity, but key difference is that our suboptimal habitats, they're not sustaining a thriving population to the extent where that population is going to send out dispersers to these other patches. So each of these patches is going to be connected by dispersal. Individuals from optimal habitats, its population size is growing. It's going to send out migrants. Those migrants are going to colonize other habitats. They're going to colonize or enter in other optimal habitats. They're going to colonize suboptimal habitats. Suboptimal habitats, however, they're not going to send out migrants. They'll receive migrants, but they won't send them out. All right, so this is our meta population. And I've laid it out here. We've got inhospitable habitat, and we've got these various patches. The patches vary not only in size, but also in their quality. So I tried to base the size, so squares were the optimal habitat, circles were suboptimal habitats. The size of the boxes would be either the size of the patch or population size, either one, because if we increase the size of the patch, we increase the carrying capacity. Decrease the size of the patch, we decrease our carrying capacity. And then we have corridors that allow for movement between our patches, and it's movement by dispersal. And again, I size the arrows based on how much dispersal is actually going to occur. So the closer patches are, the more dispersal you have. The closer the patches, the more dispersal. The farther the patches, the less likely that you'll have a dispersal event that happens. And this is kind of equivalent to islands. Islands represent patches. They're in an ocean of inhospitable habitat if we're dealing with plants or birds or any other organism. The closer the islands are, the more likely we'll have movement between the islands. The more distant ones, less likely you'll get dispersal to those islands. And the bigger the islands, the larger the population size. And some islands are better than others. All right, so our probability of dispersal, the connectivity, is going to be what makes this process work, the stability of our population work. So that dispersal will be colonization and movement to new patches. Because part of our dynamics relies on the possibility that every single patch has a chance of going extinct. And once it goes extinct, it becomes an empty patch that could then be recolonized by the rest of the subpopulations that are out there. Now, our probability of dispersing and getting to these habitats depends on the vigility of the organism. What does that mean? What's that? How well they move. Yeah, so a bird is more agile than a tree, right? Bird's more likely to disperse than a tree is to, get to an island. So vigility of the organism affects the probability of dispersal. The quality or the nature of the corridor can affect the probability of dispersal. So our corridor could be something that is protected, provides cover for an organism. An organism is going to be more likely to use that because they could remain sheltered from the overhead raptors that are preying on them. They're going to be more likely to move through that than run across an open parking lot where they are completely exposed. All right, so that's your quality of the corridor, nature of the corridor. And then our last one was distance between the patches. We talked about it. The closer you are, the more likely it is you'll get to that patch. So these are all features of a metapopulation. I've mentioned extinction risk, but each patch has a very real probability of going extinct. And it has to be the case. Because if we have a patch here that has a 0 probability of extinction, then we're not operating as a metapopulation anymore. We have to have a possibility of going extinct. Now, what would produce the extinction, the local extinction event? Usually it's going to be some sort of random event, weather event, disturbance event, something that is unpredictable, but it can occur at a suitable frequency to where the probability of extinction is going to be more than that 0.0000001. Right? You have to have a very real chance of going extinct. What determines extinction risk? Habitat quality and habitat size. So if we increase the quality, you're going to have a lower extinction risk than one that's lesser quality. So in our habitat, we have optimal habitats and suboptimal habitats. These suboptimal habitats are going to be going extinct more frequently than one of the optimal habitats. Now, the optimal habitat has to have that chance of going extinct. It has to have that in order for this to be classified a metapopulation. The other aspect is habitat size. So the larger the habitat is, the less likely we would go extinct. And that's partially due to your high population size, so less likely for random drift to actually affect the population, but also less likely that one of these random weather events is going to take out all of our individuals at once. But still, you have to have that probability. Smaller patches, more likely that an unlucky weather event can take them out. So our patches have this possibility of going extinct, and they will go extinct at some point in time. But they're going to be recolonized by all of our migrants that are happening. And it's this interaction, this dispersal, this connectivity between these patches that prevents the entire species from going extinct. So you can have any one patch go locally extinct and lose its entire population. But that's okay because we still have other patches out there that are sustaining the population, and eventually that patch that went extinct will actually be recolonized. Now the catch is that we can't have synchronous extinction events. We can't have one of these big weather events that cover a large area that wipes out all patches, because if we wipe out all patches, what did we just wipe out? We wiped out our species. All right, so our timing of the extinction of these patches, they have to be asynchronous. So we can have some that go extinct, but others can't, because they're going to serve to rescue those patches. So with this metapopulation, we have these patches where our populations exist. They have their own dynamics, their own carrying capacity, their own regulatory factors, their own dominant regulatory factors, their own selective factors, None of our patches are really going to be reaching equilibrium because each of them is going to be susceptible to these random processes that can take out the entire population in that patch. So even if they do reach their equilibrium, reach their carrying capacity, it's not going to stay there for very long because it's going to be taken out. So that's what we have on here. We've got a metapopulation, kind of similar to what we've depicted. All right. Difference, though, is that the lighter shaded circles and the dashed circles represent your suboptimal habitats. So you can see we've got randomness, we've got fluctuations. We've got some that look like they're almost stable, maybe. They're equilibrium or whatever, but they're not going to be there for long because random events are going to alter our local population size. Now, for a metapopulation, none of our patches are going to be stable, and they're not going to be stable for very long. So we will see periods of booms and busts in our patch. So the individual patches are going to see population booms or population busts. But as soon as they bust and go out, they're going to be recolonized. So here's this great example. Right here is a suboptimal patch. we've got population that's there surviving, and then it goes locally extinct. And there's no individuals that live there until colonization happens. This patch has been rescued. Population persists, reproducing, and then another extinction event happens. And our population's at 0 until it gets rescued again. Our optimal habitat's experiencing fluctuations. This one's fairly large, probably a fairly good quality one, so it's going to be less likely that it can go extinct. However, it can go extinct. This could drop all the way down to 0 and stay at 0 until it gets rescued. So as long as none of these occur all at the same time, none of the extinctions occur all at the same time, we are going to be left with patches that can rescue those that did go extinct. The net effect is that while each of these has its own dynamics and is fluctuating wildly, the overall metapopulation, all the individuals in all of the patches, they're going to remain fairly stable. And it's this stability that allows our metapopulation to exist as a spatial mosaic across our landscape. All right, so we're going to stop here on Monday. We're gonna kind of review the metapopulation again, since we just kind of got through it at the end. We'll review it, do the summary, and then we'll move on to the next topics. All right, don't forget, lab, the leachates, they have to be made. You have to bring them. Bring them to lab next week. I'd suggest getting them made today for Monday lab, definitely. Get them made today. Tuesday, preferably get them made today. Wednesday and Thursday, you can wait until Saturday or Sunday to get them made. All right. Yeah. Oh, you'll notice the difference. And make sure you pack those bottles full. Yeah, full of that plant tissue. We want to have as much as possible as in there. What was the code again? If you have justification for the bark, I'll take it. All right. 60, Madison, 60. All right.